Hey, welcome back. We're getting close to the end of the month, but I'm guessing that if you are here and you watch the Fixed Ops Mastermind show, that you prepare for the end of the month every day, don't you? So you don't need that end of the month panic. But we are here again this week. We are talking cybersecurity. It has been my mission to leave this industry a little better than I found it in 1987. Doing this show, introducing you to incredible guests like our three today, is one way that can help you and your teams get there to making the industry a little bit better. So thank you all for joining us. Joining us today, we have, I'm going to say to my right, but I don't know if that's right on your screen. Justin LeBrun is the Vice President of Operations at LM Solutions. Tom Kline is the founder and Chief Octopus Wrangler at Better Vantage Point. And Robbie Harriman is the Director of IT Advisory Services at OCD Tech. Thank you all for joining us here today. Today's show is brought to you by Parts Edge. Your parts department is the backbone of your dealership and is responsible for nearly half of your total profits, according to NADA. Our system works within your DMS for a hybrid approach that combines the precision of automation with the nuanced decision-making of parts experts. Thank you, Parts Edge. All right, so today's show, in the first part of the show, we are going to talk about what are the hackers after and how do they get it? And Kaylee just hacked the show and became Robbie. So,
congratulations, Kaylee.
Great timing.
The second part of the show, we will talk about what to do if your dealership does get attacked. And we will round that all out with how do you prevent an attack and what can you do today to start making the dealership and yourself more secure. And so we'll start out with what I think is the obvious one. And that is why are putting Robbie back up here. Why are passwords so easy to crack? I know I got my dog's name in a year, right? Nobody knows my dog's name. So Justin, start off with you. Why are passwords so easy for hackers to figure out?
All right. Thanks, Dave. I don't know if I would say necessarily they're easy to crack. I just think you have people out there that get very skilled at finding ways to figure those things out. A lot of times it could be negligence on the user's part. But often you have people out there in social engineering that get very good at finding out information about you. And we are all people that tend to fall on habits, and we need things that are easy to remember. So we have to go back on things that are, we enjoy. I'm a Minnesota Vikings football fan, so it'd be easy for me to use something around that when I'm creating a password because it's easy to remember, and a lot of people do that. And through social engineering, often different people, different social engineers now are able to find that information about you, piece it together to figure out or guess what the password might be. And I talked to you about this, Dave, earlier in the week about when we do staff training. My company does a lot of staff training on different things for different companies in our area. And one area we do talk about heavily is passwords. And without fail, when we do training, there's at least one person in the audience that does whatever the current season is with the year. So, it kind of falls on a cycle. They can do spring 2024, and then when that one's time to change, they go summer 2024, and so on and so forth. So yeah, those can be easily hacked, but often it's just you got to be more just be aware of who you're talking to, what information you're putting in there, and try your best not to put that type of information out there because it would be easily guessed. It's not some hacker and some Bond villain behind the computer just hacking away to figure out your specific password. It's usually something we are giving them either through a social engineering attack over the phone or a phishing email. You click on a link and they can kind of track what you're typing in and where you're typing it, things of that nature. It usually comes down to the individual just being aware and being conscious of their actions.
Awesome. That is good information. So social engineering, I think that's a new term for me. Is that like a prompt engineer for ChatGPT?
Not necessarily, no. It's typically an individual like you or me that, they are probably the more common hackers, if you will. They're people that learn how to get information from you through conversation. It might be they give you a phone call impersonating somebody else, and just by trusting them, they'll give you the information over the phone. Or phishing emails. A lot of times when you get a phishing email that's coming from somebody, that's often a social engineer just trying to gather information from you. Social engineering is really any attacker that is just trying to use their wit, their ability to conversate with people to gather information, so that way they know that they can take that information and apply it to maybe usernames, passwords, or hacking into systems. I actually saw a video where there's a lady who this was at a hacking conference in, I think, Vegas or something, where on a live stream she hacked into somebody's the person that was running the event hacked into their phone account by essentially just doing social engineering. She called AT&T impersonating this person's wife and making the seem like stressful, like she's carrying the baby around, baby's crying, all this stuff that's not real, but the person on the other end of the phone doesn't know it's real. And AT&T ends up giving away the password credentials and stuff like that. So essentially that would be like a social engineer, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. So probably not a job that I'm going to find posted on LinkedIn anytime soon.
It could be.
I was going to say, we actually hire social engineers.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
So they're not all bad people then, right? So I often talk about that during a sales process, even as an advisor, that manipulation is not necessarily a bad word, right? So social engineer is not always a bad thing. Just something that is happening.
Dave, I could sorry, Robbie.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Tom.
I was just going to say, I walk into dealerships. Everybody knows what this is, right?
It's my password keeper.
It's a password keeper. That's exactly right. Right? It goes right to the bottom of the screen, either that or the desk blotter, right? And so, of course, that's a violation of the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act and all kinds of other things. But start with the basics. And just to kind of add on what Justin said, there are free password managers. I think 1Password is one of them, but you can Google free password managers, and they allow you to put your information in, and then it's 64-bit encrypted. Some are higher than that, but they'll encrypt your password, so you only have to remember 1Password, and then they will let you into all the other websites. So that's kind of best practices, in my opinion. Robbie and Justin may have a different opinion, but best practices is to use one of those password managers to keep all your passwords wrangled, so you don't have to use the password manager here. By the way, come in different colors. They come in pink, yellow, green, whatever colors you like. So,
yeah, we actually have a blooper reel of some of the worst that we've seen. And in one case, we did a security assessment of a dealership where we walked in through an open service bay door. The server closet was located within the service bay. Not only was it not locked, it didn't have a lock on it. We walk into the server room, and on the screen of the domain controller and the stack of all of their servers was the domain administrator username and password. So we went from sidewalk to having the keys of the kingdom within less than 5 minutes.
right.
So it's, yeah, to your point, Tom, and to kind of expand on what Justin said too, the concept of a password is kind of inherently flawed because it's something a human's trying to remember. Computers can remember much more than we can. We can maybe remember 4 or 5 things at once. So to be expected to remember all of these passwords of varying length and complexity is unreasonable. So the password managers are definitely the way to go because we have a password cracking machine here because we are ethical hackers and social engineers. We only do so when we're contracted to and paid to do so. But we have a computer that actually cracks passwords, and something like password 123, if people are using that, we can crack that in less than 1 second. Something like Red Sox 2018, another common one, that takes us about 2 seconds to crack. Add an exclamation point to make it more complex. That'll take us about 90 seconds to crack. So a prime example of some of those common words and terms that we see. And to Justin's point, that's one of the things we'll do is what's called password spraying, where we'll take that one common password, Red Sox 2018, try it against every account to see where it hits. And that's what attackers are doing.
Yeah, that I think back the last time I was running a store was in 2020, and there were 17 different programs that I had to have open every day to run the store. So that was 17 different passwords that I had to have. We didn't have a password manager. I had my password keeper. Took more than one for 17 sites, but yeah, it's difficult, right? If you're at a store and they don't have a dedicated password keeper, but you do have a lot of different systems that you're using at the store, and they all have different password requirements. Not that you want to use the same password for everyone, but you can anyways, because they're all different requirements. And trying to remember that and remember what you have to do for the day is really difficult. So thank you for all that information. When somebody is attacking a dealership, Tom, what is the information that they're looking for? What are they trying to get?
Any foothold that they can, to try to exploit whatever they're looking for. If they're looking to try to, I guess it depends on the nature of the bad guy and what they're trying to accomplish. But most, I would say, and I did a little homework before I came on the show today. Automotive News in 2022 reported on an average day 153 viruses and 84 malicious spam emails are blocked by technology on a dealership network. That's per day, 153 viruses and 84 malicious spam emails. So, they could be looking for, identity theft. In 2019, the FTC, as an example, reported that there were close to 39,000 reported cases of identity theft. So they could be looking for the treasure trove of information that you get at a car dealership. Remember, we have their birthday, their social, their pay stubs, their proof of the roof, their everything. And so we are data rich. And as a result of that, dealerships need to take better precautions to make sure that their information that they have on their customers is kept safe. So I guess to really answer your question kind of directly, I guess it's two things. Number one, they're looking for customer information or potential customers that they could get, create a synthetic identity, and they're looking for dealership information in any way that they might be able to try to get the controller to wire money for whatever it is, or gift cards, or be able to lock them out of their system and try to ransom them. Kind of, there's a lot of imagination that they use here, and they play the long game. It's not a short thing. They will wait and monitor your email until they see that you need to send a wire transfer over, and they'll have that somehow booby trapped, so they see that email, then they'll respond with the wrong wiring information. I mean, this is very sophisticated, folks.
So, Robbie, from your standpoint, I just talked about the fact that I had 17 different programs that I had to open every day to run the store. What is the dealerships are using it? And that was just my department, right? There's a lot more tech than that they're using. So what are the responsibilities of the dealerships in trying to figure out whether what they're using is secure or not, or how do they even go about that? Oh, there he is. Sorry, Robbie. I think you were frozen. Did you hear that question?
My internet hiccuped for a second. So what's the responsibility of the dealership is what I caught, and then it sort of cut out.
So, yeah, so I was talking about the dealership is using, I said that I use 17 different programs to run my department. So what is the responsibility of the dealership in using those third parties? If somebody's trying to attack one of the third parties to get into the dealership, what are the responsibilities and what can a dealership do to try and protect themselves from that?
Yeah, so the onus is definitely on the dealership and the management team to understand these risks, to know what vendors they're using, what their security precautions are. Not only is it just a general responsibility as a security best practice, but due to the enhanced FTC safeguards rule that was put in place, and all of which the requirements were due June of last year, there's a requirement in there specifically to manage your third-party vendors, to contractually require them to protect consumer information, just as dealerships are required to protect it. So it's really about, for one, having an inventory of who all of your vendors are. We always recommend looking at your accounting system and figure out who do we cut checks to. That's one good place to look, because trying to do it by memory, you're oftentimes going to miss, some marketing firm that has access to your data or something like that you may not even think of. But it's really about knowing what you have, where your data is, specifically sensitive consumer data, and then working with those vendors to determine if they have the proper security measures in place. And really your use of their tools is up to you. We talked about the password issue. One of the ways to mitigate some of that risk around people using poor passwords is to make sure that you're using multi-factor authentication. Because again, humans and their memories are inherently flawed. The human element is actually leveraged in about 74% of cyber attacks. So, it's training up humans and also making sure that you have an additional factor to sort of mitigate that. So when we're using those 17 programs, when we have a cloud-based DMS system or a CRM, we need to make sure that we're leveraging all the security measures that they have available in the use of their tools, and also validating that they've got the protection in place on the back end to handle our customers' data.
Excellent. Good to know. All right, we're going to take a quick break here for our stat of the week. And that stat is ransomware attacks increased by more than 12% over the previous year, when 76% of organizations reported at least one attack. So if you do a little bit of math there, that takes you to 88% of people. And that came from a Veeam.com ransomware trends report at the end of 2023. And the stat of the week is brought to you by Parts Edge. And so let's move into what happens after we get attacked. We're at the dealership and somebody realizes that an attack has happened. Do we do the old standby, turn the computer off? If there's, let's stick to one question at a time. Do we just shut the computers off? What do we do? Do we panic? Do we pull the fire alarms? And Justin, we'll start with you on this. You're under attack. Where do we start?
I mean, typically the very first step I would take is, before the attack happens, your leadership should be doing an incident response plan. You can create a plan to put into place. It's typically a series of processes and policies of exactly what will we do when this attack starts. And that'll list out things like, first, to contact the IT department, get them working on it. What, partners do we need to talk to? How do we get a second system in place to kind of get the process started, so we can still help our customers while we work on this other issue? Have we been running our backups like we're supposed to? And the other thing in addition to that would be doing some kind of training, incident response training, whether it's tabletop exercises to practice, what the policies and processes are stating. But I think more than anything, that first step is making sure you're getting in contact with your IT department to kind of help them kind of step into place.
Gotcha. Tom, we'll move over to you with the same question. So I come into the dealership, I realize that something's going on, and I call Tom and say, Octopus is out of the box. What do I do?
Tentacles are everywhere.
They're all over the place.
They're all over the place. So the first thing, if it's one computer, my understanding is you should disconnect the computer from the internet, not unplug it. Robbie will correct me if I'm wrong here, because he's the CISA on the call. But you should disconnect it from the internet. First thing to do is know which computers are potentially infected and start there. The second thing is you're supposed to pull out your data breach response plan that you were supposed to have in place by June the 9th of last year, which details exactly what you're supposed to do in the case of a potential data breach. So if you have that, you should be able to pull it out and follow it. If you don't have it, then you need to call Justin or me or Robbie and say, what the heck do I do? That's the second thing. The third thing, and I want to emphasize this, you said we probably get to this at the end, but I have to poke it in here, is if you have cyber insurance, you call and put your carrier on notice immediately, because they will pay for various things, and different cyber policies obviously have different limits and different widgets and things that are covered and not covered, but they will, the point of having cyber insurance is they will send a forensic team in to tell you what happened. They'll notify you what you need to do. They should be the ones, there's usually, if it's a big breach, there are expenses associated with public relations that they will provide for you. They'll provide a public relations expert to help you respond to whatever happened. It'll pay for your legal expenses. It'll pay for any downtime that you have if you've got the right coverage. So I would, and if you don't have insurance, by the way, after today's call, I would stop, drop, and roll and get cyber insurance today. So, and I'm happy to talk offline with anybody. I don't sell insurance, but I advise dealers on that. So I will certainly, one of the most important things is, business interruption. There should be a business interruption component with your cyber insurance. If you're down for any reason, you can't fix cars or you can't sell cars or whatever it is that you can't do, there is a business interruption component that would pay for all that. So I'd start there, and that will lead to next steps.
Awesome. And Robbie, what do you have to add to that?
Tom hit it on the head as far as the technical aspects, disconnecting from the internet, but not powering down. Because as he mentioned, part of that process, would likely be a forensic investigation. And when they send in those forensic investigators, they're going to look on that computer to, maybe find things that are in memory, things that are taking place, that once you power down the computer, you're going to lose that chain of evidence. So he definitely hit it on the head with that. And Justin was sort of singing our tune of the preparation, having an incident response plan that steps you through containment, eradication, investigation, and doing that all in a vacuum is much easier than doing it in the heat of the moment. I always equate it to training for boxing. Learning to slip a punch and counter is much easier to do when somebody isn't throwing punches at your face. And it's oftentimes those heated moments that people get in an incident and they're trying to figure out, oh my goodness, do I need to contact the Attorney General? Am I required to report this to the FTC? When do we need to let our customers know? All of those things definitely need to be determined ahead of time in a policy and plan. And then, as Justin mentioned, actually executing a test of that plan, running through it regularly to make sure, all of our roles and responsibilities, are they well defined? Do we have any snags in the process when we walk through this? And then updating that regularly.
As Mike Tyson said, Dave, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face, right?
It is so true. And if you've ever been punched in the face, you can understand why.
Every single day that I was a dealer, that's what it felt like.
Exactly. So, Robbie, you just mentioned notifying the FTC and things. So, what is a dealership's what is their liability when something like this happens? And what is their responsibility to notify the FTC or customers? More importantly than the FTC, where is the line when you have to notify somebody?
Sure. So I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV. But it's a complicated issue because there are actually a lot of lines, and it's a lot to keep track of because you have the expanded FTC safeguards rule, which outlines how data should be protected. But there's now, it actually goes into effect the 13th of next month. In May, there's a new reporting requirement that if there's a breach that impacts 500 or more consumers, that you're required to report it to the FTC within 30 days. But in addition to that, each state has its own data privacy and protection laws that may have reporting requirements. I know Massachusetts certainly does. They have a public data breach disclosure program where you can go in and see when breaches have occurred. There are a number of manufacturers that are now imposing their own breach requirements onto stores. So it's a lot to keep track of. So it just highlights further the necessity to have an incident response plan that defines all of this. I definitely suggest enlisting help from legal counsel, working with your cyber insurance policy carrier to be sure that you understand all of your reporting requirements, because that in itself is a lot to keep track of. So it's a lot of moving parts, but you're responsible as a dealer to know what those requirements are, to have them documented, and to be prepared in the event of an incident.
Right. So, Tom, and I know you're not a lawyer either, but so what about service advisor, service director, general manager of the store? Is there anything, if I look into the fixed ops side of the world, right? A tech makes a repair that causes an accident down the road, and that there's some negligence that gets determined there, that tech can be personally liable for that. Is there anything that can fall on an advisor? It was a service advisor that clicked on a malicious link that caused a breach of 7,000 customers' data out of the finance office. So they got everything. Is there some link there?
I think there always could be a link to have personal responsibility. The laws vary in every state, and I too am not a lawyer, but play one on TV. But as a compliance guy and a risk guy, can there be personal liability? Yes. Is it likely? I think it's unlikely, but certainly there are scenarios. But it's really going to depend on the laws of the state and the federal laws, of which are 1,000 miles wide and 1,000 miles deep. But that's why I think it's super important to have cyber insurance, because you rely on their knowledge, and you have kind of the one throat to choke policy, which every dealer likes to have one source to go to say, okay, first we have to determine how many names were actually breached. As Robbie said, this new regulation that goes in on May 13th, if it's 500 or more names, you're required to report it to the FTC. But if it's less than 500, then you don't have to report it to the FTC, but you've got other reporting requirements potentially. But you won't know that until the forensics happen. And so you've got to really make sure this is sequenced properly. And so when you contact your cyber insurance company, and I want everybody to say, yes, I have cyber insurance by the time this is over, or at least you're dialing your insurance agent. But following their lead, because this is what they do, is your best policy, and they should be able to guide you through at a, you know, and let's face it, at a minimum cost with the most minimum disruption, because this is very it's very disruptive. As I mentioned, I did a little homework, which I'll share as we go through the broadcast here. And there's a survey was done in 2022, and the validity, you can be the judge, but 84% of the surveyed customers said they wouldn't buy another car from a dealership after their data has been compromised. So this very much is a reputational issue, a reputation issue, and you need to protect your reputation, because you don't want to be the guy who calls the third generation customer to tell him his data's been breached, right? You know, their father bought a car, their grandfather bought a car from you, and they buy cars from you, and that's just not a call you want to make.
That is definitely not the call you wish to make. And I mean, we're fighting for customer retention as it is. You don't need to add that into the mix. And really, it's just a matter of even getting a sniff of the fact that it might have happened, right? It's, right. You know, maybe, Robbie, I think you mentioned the number of like 500 customers. Well, if a dealership reaches out and says that the information of 500 of our customers was breached, my assumption is going to be I'm one of the 500.
Of course.
I am falling somewhere between 1 and 500 in that list, even if I'm not on that list. So that is a dangerous road to travel for a dealership who is relying on reputation alone. And it's not like, I mean, so Target got breached, right? A couple of years ago, I think it was. I think about that and I go, okay, you know, what did they really get? Like at worst, I have to get a new debit card, right? but the dealership gets breached. I gave them everything. Mm-hmm. They've got social security numbers. They've got bank accounts. They have everything that they need to really dig into my life if they want to, and go and buy some cars somewhere else. Probably not the kind of cars I want to pay for. So,
well, I do think you make a good point on that, Dave, with reputation in general. It's hard to consistently build a solid reputation over the years and have it stay sustainable. And that's why it makes it so valuable. And especially in the automotive industry, where there are some dealers historically over the years that may not have, you know, always had the best practices on the sales side or whatever it might be, that, you know, it can be difficult to maintain a good reputation constantly, just to have something small, someone clicking on a link, something doing, you know, something that's not necessarily malicious. They just weren't fully thinking in the moment, and it takes down your entire reputation, because they do have all that sensitive data that you would have at any other banks or anything like that, which is why this has become such an important topic, I think, for dealerships as a whole.
Yeah, and I mentioned before we started recording that I was at a dealership group that did experience a ransomware attack, and although they never told us who clicked the link, what they did tell us was that it was a malicious link sent through an email that somebody clicked, right? So and it's, you can look at it and say, who would do that? Like of all the times you've been told not to do that. But I look at some of the emails that come through to me, and they don't necessarily look suspicious unless you're looking at them suspiciously, right? You get an email from Tom that says, "Hey Dave, really need you to do me a favor real quick," right? And maybe it says, "Nominate me for this," right? And that's the malicious link.
No,
I'm not thinking, I'll click on that.
The link I'll send will be the wire transfer instructions. I just make sure we're clear on that.
Yeah, well,
and it's only getting harder.
I need to choose somebody different than Tom, because you're not getting. Sorry, go ahead, Justin.
AI and, mostly AI, you hear all these emerging technologies coming through, making cybersecurity a little more difficult. But AI is the one that's scaring people, I think, the most, because of the potential impacts you can have. Dave, you and I think, were the ones that we were talking before about how you created an entire video of you talking, but you never said a single word in that video. It was completely created by AI. And I heard of another story where a guy was on a call with his board of directors or all the executives, and it's a virtual meeting like this. And during that, someone told him, "Hey, we need you to transfer us XYZ dollars." And he thought he was talking to his team, so he did it. And in fact, it's all fake, it's all AI. And that's why I think, back in the day, maybe early on, an email that said that was easy to catch because the domain was easily clearly wrong, or there's tons of misspellings. There's a lot of things that bounce at you, but anymore they are getting very sophisticated. Those emails are getting very difficult to catch unless like you said, you're being very aware, which is what makes awareness training so important, because you want to keep those mental memory, those mental muscles in the right spot at all times.
Yeah. And it was us that had that conversation, and that video I played for my son, and I played it and said, "Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think I should change about this video?" or something like that. I said to him, and he watched it. And then I told him afterwards it was AI. And he was like, my son just turned 18. He was like freaked out and left the room. he's like, that is really scary. Yeah.
It's scary. I mean, one of the things when individuals have said, well, what can I do about this individually? And there's only two things that I know of. One is to put a credit freeze on all three of your bureaus, so that people can't access your credit. I've had my identity stolen, and that's a whole different story, and we could talk about that too. But that, and companies like LifeLock offer cyber protection for deep faking, like Justin was just talking about. And so they have indemnity in there that if you get money stolen or you get tricked out of the money or whatever it is, that individually, not as a company, that they will protect you. So those are really, as an individual, those are the only two things that I've been able to find, and I've researched it quite a lot.
Yeah, I know we actually had a person in our neighborhood who somehow scammed another woman in the neighborhood, and so she had told my wife about it, and that was what she had suggested, was locking the credit on your credit reports, so that nothing can happen unless you unlock that. And sorry about that, Robbie, I cut you off.
No worries. I was just going to say, in addition, that just kind of highlights the importance of thinking about your digital identity in the digital age, because so much of our information is out there and so many people are reckless about what they disclose on the internet. Thinking about, what are your Facebook privacy settings? Are you posting that you're on vacation? How much video and content are you posting out there that people could take and use to craft an AI version of you? But if you limit that information, and not anybody in the world as an outsider can go and find out what is your dog's name, what is your child's birth date, you start to kind of reduce some of those possibilities, because as ethical hackers and social engineers, that's one of the first things that we do during a simulated attack is we go out and use that open source intelligence. We research people, we look at their LinkedIn, we look at their personal social media to craft something that we know they're going to respond to based on personal information we can gather from their digital footprint. So, all those individual security settings, obviously each company is going to do what they can to protect their employees and to protect their assets. But as an individual, you're also responsible for safeguarding your information that could be used against you.
And so, Robbie, I didn't do this to safeguard my personal information, but I used to change my birthday on Facebook to a day in the current month every month, just so people would keep wishing me happy birthday. And it's amazing how many people wish you happy birthday month after month after month without realizing changed your birthday.
Win-win. That's a brilliant strategy. There's no downside.
It was until I got locked out of my Facebook account because you needed to verify your birthday, and I couldn't. So
Backfired, yeah.
million after that. All right. So, Justin, one of the things that you do is you have the Fish Busters Academy, right? Is the name of it?
Correct. That's correct.
Where you are helping to teach people the things that they need to watch out for.
Correct.
And so the first thing that comes to my mind, and it's probably because of my age, but it's email phishing stuff. But what are some of the other things that are out there that people need to look out for?
In terms of, are you speaking specifically on training, like different ways to train, or different attacks that could come in?
Different things that you're training people to watch out for.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I mean, number one definitely is phishing. That's still the top area that you really want to watch out for. Something else we recommend on would be having people do like a physical security assessment, which is, in itself kind of training. You're essentially having somebody come in, they can check random things like, is the back door locked or unlocked? When they're walking through the building, what's laying on the table? Do they have Post-it notes? They have their password keeper sitting on top of their desk with their passwords easily accessible. Different things like that, because essentially the name of the game is, at the end of the day, is you want to protect your login credentials and making sure people can't access the system. I think it was Robbie that mentioned MFA, multi-factor authentication. We do teach on that heavily. But at the end of the day, to be honest, all the technology of the world is great, but every single one of them has some kind of vulnerability that could be exploited in one way or the other. Robbie probably is an expert on those in his field right now, but we do our best to implement controls, but the biggest thing is just teaching staff to be fully aware of everything. Outside of specifically phishing, one thing we try to make sure people do is review policies, practice the policies. Going back to that deep fake video we're talking about, where the guy transferred his money to what he thought was another executive in the company, that could have been avoided if they had a process in place for how do we transfer that money, and what kind of checks and balances do we have in to make sure I'm not sending this money to somebody that I shouldn't. So that's one area we do, as well as make sure, for every situation, every business process you have, make sure you have the actual process and policy written, and whoever's operating on, or whoever's job role, I guess it would be, is responsible for that, make sure they're fully trained on that responsibility. So that way, if they get an email saying, hey, this is Bob from, the CEO, because, they can spoof the email. Hey, this is Bob. I need you to send me 25 gift cards and, $100 each to this address. You don't think it's actually Bob, because you have a process that you need to follow before doing that. At the end of the day, it's just staff training is one of the most important things you can do, just to keep everybody conscious of things going on in the company.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, checks and balances are one of the simple things that we can do, right? And I can think of dealerships where I had the power to write purchase orders to pay vendors or other people, and I also had check signer privileges.
That's
to me,
scary, Dave.
Yeah, isn't it? I'm like, and why did they do it? They did it because, as the service director, if the dealership was open, I was probably going to be in the building, right? If I wasn't there, if it was going to be after service closed, then the GM would be there, and he was a check signer. So They always had somebody in the building to sign a check. But as a check and balance, it wasn't a real good system.
Right.
Yes, and so even at our company, we have our office manager, Shelly, who's kind of like our Swiss Army knife. She knows how to do pretty much everything, and she handles most of it. But yet she's the one that would be writing the checks, right? But when it's time to write a check, almost every time, depending on what we're paying for, she'll come to me, and we'll have a verbal conversation prior to her writing that check. Now, that might not be something every business can do, depending on the size, but it's just a small step to just say, okay, let's just make sure something doesn't happen where she thinks she got an email from me and she's paying something she shouldn't, because we always have that in-person conversation before making any of those expenditures that aren't on an ongoing basis. And that's just a small example.
Yeah, it's just a great point. And one more quick break, this time for our quote of the week, brought to you by Parts Edge. What you do today can improve all your tomorrows. That is from Ralph Marston, and completely appropriate for what we are talking about here today, right? Because what you do to improve your cybersecurity at your dealership is definitely going to make all your tomorrows better. And so, Robbie, I wanted to jump over to you. So you had mentioned MFA earlier. Justin just mentioned it again. For anybody out there that doesn't know what it is, and I'll say I know about this much of it. Can you describe for us what that is, what it involves?
Sure. So in order to gain access to information systems and assets, you first need to authenticate who you are as a person. So in order to do so, we've got the traditional method, which is the password. Multi-factor authentication adds an additional layer to that. And that layer is typically kind of a rule of one of three. It's something you know, something you have, and something you are. So something you know would be a password. And then in addition to that, you should have one of those two other factors. So something you have would be like they make a token or a key that generates numbers or that you can plug into your laptop and verifies that not only do I know this person's password, but I have the specific device that was issued to this person. Another example of that is the cell phone text codes that you get as a factor. So that reduces the likelihood of, it's one thing to guess or steal someone's password, but then in addition to also have to steal a device that they have, really reduces the likelihood. And then the third one of those, something that you are, would be something like a retina scan, fingerprint, biometrics. So many laptops have them now. So it's adding that additional layer of security so that, sure, your password's still important, but it's not the only thing that's going to, allow an attacker to get in as you.
Okay, so it's like the old wedding thing, right? Something old, something new, something borrowed, something new. Something like you've got to provide all of those, or you can't enter the system you are trying to enter.
Was that a wedding joke?
What's that?
The systems you were trying to enter, is that a wedding joke? I didn't know.
Wow, I guess it could be. So you totally took me off track now, Tom.
That's my job. It
is. I should have expected it. All right. So going back to cybersecurity, if a dealership could do three things to protect itself, and let's take three things of cost no factor. Three things that a dealership could do to protect itself. What would those three things be? And Tom, we'll start with you on that one.
Well, that costs no money. I guess the things that cost no money are education, right? I mean, that's that making sure all the employees. Sorry, go ahead.
Cost no factor. Cost is not a factor.
Oh, cost is not a factor.
So it can cost no money, or it can cost.
Okay, cost is not a factor. Well, then I'm gonna give you a little bit of a longer answer to that question because, so there have been two major data breaches with dealerships. I'm sure there's probably more than two, but certainly two that I can name off the top of my head. One was the Coons data breach, which happened a number of years ago. That was 2022. And then Berglund Auto Group, which is in Roanoke, Virginia. Both of them actually about 2-3 hours from where I'm sitting. And in preparation for today, I went and looked at the complaint for the Coons Group was 46 pages long. This is a class action suit. And I pulled out part of just a couple of quick items from it that I thought would really answer that question, because I thought that would be coming. And it says in the lawsuit, defendant should have implemented as recommended by the U.S. government the following measures. implement an awareness training program, enable strong spam filters to prevent phishing emails, scan all incoming and outgoing emails to detect threats and filter executable files from reaching end users. And these are a lot of Robbie and what Justin do. Configuring firewalls to block access to known malicious IP addresses, patch operating system software and firmware, set antivirus and anti-malware programs, and then I'm going to skip about 9 of them. And then they said to prevent and detect, defendant could and should have implemented as recommended by the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which I know Robbie can speak to, update and patch your computer, use caution with links when entering website addresses, open email attachments with caution, keep your personal information safe, verify email senders, inform yourself with cybersecurity threats and up to date on ransomware techniques, and use and maintain preventative software programs. So these were all the kind of the battering rams that the lawyers used to say that Coons didn't do enough to protect the consumer data. So if you kind of, and I'm interested in hearing what Robbie and Justin and what their opinions on this is, if you take of all those things, then you have to then put it into actionable, what can I do? Number 1, 2, 3. Some of these are obvious, like continuous monitoring would be one of the things. But those are the things that the lawyers are going to be looking for if you have a data breach. So you have the template here of what they're going to allege that you didn't do. So you need to do as many of those things as your business, the size and scope and complexity of your business allows. It could be that because of your size and scope. I mean, I have a dealership I walked into recently. They didn't even have a door on their IT room. So at least in Robbie's case, they had a door. This was just out in the middle of this, literally just right off the showroom. So these are depending on your size and complexity, you can't do all these things necessarily. But this is one of those things you got to do the best you can.
All right. And Robbie, same question coming to you. Top 3 things you can do. Money, no object.
Sure. So money, no object. The first would be to build a team of cybersecurity experts. The expanded FTC safeguards rule actually has a requirement to have a designated qualified individual. So it seems like a very silly thing, but that's one of the first questions I always ask of a dealership is, who is your qualified individual and what are their qualifications? Because if we can't point the finger and say, this is the person that's looking out for our security and compliance, we're in a lot of trouble. So a team of experts is definitely one of the top ones. The nice thing about that is any of the no money being an object recommendations, there are scaled down versions of them. So the scaled down version of that is to hire a third-party consultant, a virtual CISO or a fractional CISO, so you don't have to fork over a 6-figure salary for somebody full-time looking over your security. A team of experts retained for a fraction of that per month that are going to help to guide your security. So that's kind of number 1 is the personnel part. The next, as Tom mentioned, 24/7 security monitoring would be ideal. These are becoming more cost-effective or affordable these days for small to medium-sized companies, but still kind of a gold standard thing. The alternative to that, and this was designated in the enhanced FTC safeguards, is to do vulnerability scanning and penetration testing at the very least in lieu of continuous monitoring. So having a checkpoint at least a couple times a year to scan your systems and determine how vulnerable are we, can an attacker get in, rather than monitoring all the time. So that would be the second one. And then the third would really be the training and monitoring, or training and staff education, which isn't a big cost. But again, the human element is so common in these attacks. That's, you really have to foster a security of culture from the top down and make sure that we're having these conversations about security people are aware of their responsibilities, and that it's coming from management and throughout.
Mm-hmm.
Good. All right. Justin, just to
Yes.
change it up a little bit, the top
Yeah.
3 things that anyone can do. So it doesn't have to be a dealership, just regular old Joe with his password keeper on his desk. What can he do?
Yeah, I mean, it's some of it might be repetitive, but honestly, my approach would probably be regardless if they're a dealership or working in a small business in the area. I'm going to list these out kind of more like cheap to most expensive, but all very are important. One's not higher than the other. The first one I will kind of double down on what Robbie was saying with training. Training, I break out into a couple different areas. One, yes, the staff training. That's where you get into your awareness training, where you might have phishing simulations sent to end users to get them used to catching those things. I would also going with the having a cyber team. I think it's important to keep them trained and updated on what's new and relevant. There's a lot of certification platforms out there where they can get certified in different areas in cybersecurity to ensure that they're knowledgeable and are able to apply some of the necessary tools and thought processes into the system. But the biggest one is the leadership. Within the leadership, they need to be not only trained in areas of like instant response and making sure they know how to take action and when to take action, but they also need to be trained to trust and rely on that cyber team that Robbie was mentioning that they develop. Because at the end of the day, a lot of times leadership doesn't want to relinquish some of the decision making in certain areas, and so you can actually hurt your cybersecurity program because you're thinking you might know more than them in that moment, and you're looking at the cost versus value, things of that nature. A lot of times, if your cyber expert saying, "Hey, this is something we need," they should have a lot of wiggle room to make that happen because it's important. So that's my first one, is really focusing on training, and that is very inexpensive. Whether you do it in-house or you hire somebody to do it, it's something can be done relatively cheap. Next thing I would do is everybody should probably, I shouldn't say probably, everybody as well, do an annual risk assessment. You can get, there's frameworks out there. We rely a lot on the NIST 800-171. I strongly suggest finding a third-party vendor that might be able to do this for you. It is more of an investment opposed to you doing a self-assessment. But the reason I say that is your IT people will implement policies and procedures. And if you get an information security expert that comes in and does a risk assessment, they don't have any preconceived notions of how great the system is already. And they can almost work together to collaborate and find potential findings. And with that being said, anything they find, take very seriously. Try to take action on getting those remediated quickly. And the last thing would be find somebody, for my number 3, would find somebody like Robbie's. I'm assuming Robbie's company with his ethical hacking would be doing the penetration testing. That is very important because you can get into the penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, going back to that physical security assessment. All of those have different roles when you're trying to find vulnerabilities within your company, and they can all help you find areas that you might not be thinking of. They'll find certain areas that somebody could easily hack into a breach, or they might find a certain change management controls that should have been implemented before, and you missed an update on one of your software patches or something. There's each of these areas between the risk assessment, penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, physical security assessment. They all have roles to finding areas that you might be vulnerable to an attack. And if you have those done, yes, it's an upfront cost, but it'll pay off in the end if you can implement those findings to make sure you're secure.
That is an amazing list that everybody can take and either spend a whole lot of money on or no money on to make yourself, your dealership more secure. Again, today's show is brought to you by Parts Edge. I want to thank Parts Edge very much for their sponsorship of the show and bringing this to us. Thank you, Kaylee, for also being part of our studio audience. And thank you to my guests, Justin, Tom, Robbie, bringing great information. Thank you for taking time out of your days to come and bring information to the industry to help the industry get better, help the industry protect the customers better, and help us all become better servants to our customers, and our teams for the people who are protecting the security of the dealerships. Next week, excuse me, next week is Leaders Lead, and we will have with us Joe Clementi, Vice President of Service Operations at Mobility Works, also known as #Coach Joe. Scott Beal, a CEO, best-selling author, and a former dealer principal, and John Traver, CEO of Traver Companies and father of the modern BDC, will be with us next week to talk about Leaders Lead. Again, thank you to my guest. Thank you to our studio audience. We greatly appreciate you being here. And we will see everybody again next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Take care.